They say the most powerful building in the world isn't the White House or even the halls of Congress. It's a windowless fortress in Arlington, Virginia, the Pentagon. The brain of America's military, humming with secrets, strategies, and vulnerabilities the world will never see. So when the news broke that someone had slipped inside its digital walls, not a spy, not a foreign government, not even a team of elite hackers, but a kid, barely a teenager, the world stood still. This is the story of the boy who hacked the Pentagon. A story that's not just about firewalls and codes, but about innocence colliding with power, curiosity colliding with fear, and the blurred line between genius and crime. His name was Jonathan James, but online he went by another name, an alias he built like a secret identity. He wasn't tall or intimidating. He didn't sit in a dark basement surrounded by glowing screens like Hollywood would want you to believe. He was just a kid with messy hair, a wry smile, and a mind that moved faster than anyone around him. Jonathan didn't hack for money. He wasn't trying to take down governments. What he wanted was to see if he could. The same way a child might push against a locked door or climb a tree taller than their parents thought possible. But the door Jonathan pushed open wasn't a door at all. It was the digital gateway into some of the Pentagon's most sensitive systems. It began small: government websites, defense contractors, the kinds of networks most people assumed were impenetrable. And yet, to Jonathan, they were puzzles. Flawed systems with missing pieces he couldn't help but rearrange. At just 15 years old, he breached NASA's systems. He downloaded proprietary software worth over $1 million. Software that controlled the International Space Station's life support functions. Think about that. While most kids his age were doing algebra homework, Jonathan was inside the code that kept astronauts alive in space. And then, one night, his curiosity pulled him deeper into the Pentagon's Defense Threat Reduction Agency, a system designed to monitor and protect against weapons of mass destruction. And somehow, a boy sitting at his computer in South Florida was suddenly there. The FBI called it one of the most serious intrusions in U.S. military history, but Jonathan called it something else. He called it a game, a test of his own mind against the world's strongest defenses. When agents finally tracked him down, they didn't find a hardened criminal. They found a teenager sitting in his parents' home, surrounded by textbooks and video games. But the law doesn't measure intent. It measures impact. And the impact of Jonathan's clicks reverberated through the highest levels of government. He became the first juvenile ever incarcerated in the United States for cybercrime. His sentence? House arrest, probation, a future marked not by possibility, but by suspicion. What no one seemed to ask was why. Why did a 15-year-old child feel drawn into the Pentagon's walls? Why did a boy, not even old enough to drive, find comfort in the challenge of dismantling systems built by the greatest military in the world? Some say Jonathan was a prodigy, a mind too big for the small world around him. Others say he was reckless, a reminder that technology had outpaced the rules meant to govern it. But Jonathan himself once said something different. He said hacking was about curiosity, exploration, and knowledge. Not destruction, not greed, just discovery. And yet the story doesn't end with a slap on the wrist. Years later, Jonathan's name resurfaced in an investigation into a major cybercrime ring. Authorities suspected he was involved. He insisted he wasn't. But in 2008, with the weight of the past pressing down on him, with federal investigators circling his life once again, Jonathan James was found dead, a single gunshot wound. He was 24 years old. In his suicide note, he wrote, "I honestly had nothing to do with TJX," referring to the massive data breach he was accused of. And then, Hauntingly, I have no faith in the justice system. Perhaps my actions today and this letter will send a stronger message to the public. The boy who hacked the Pentagon had been buried under the very weight of his own legend, not remembered as a kid with insatiable curiosity, but as a criminal, a threat, a name in the FBI's files. But maybe Jonathan's story isn't really about crime at all. Maybe it's about the invisible line between genius and danger, between a question and a crime, between a child exploring his limits and a government terrified of what those limits might reveal. And so we're left with a question, not about Jonathan, but about ourselves. What do we do with the minds who don't fit neatly into our systems? The children who see doors where the rest of us see walls. Do we punish them? Do we fear them? Or do we listen to what they're trying to show us? Because somewhere out there right now, another 15-year-old is staring at a computer screen. Not for money, not for fame, but because they're curious. And because, maybe, they're already seeing the cracks in the walls that protect our world. And the real question is, when they push that door open, will we know how to understand them before it's too late? They called him a ghost, a name that appeared in the Pentagon's internal logs one night in the late 1990s, then vanished without a trace. He wasn't a foreign spy. He wasn't a seasoned hacker for hire. He was just a teenager, sitting in a dimly lit bedroom, surrounded by stacks of empty soda cans and glowing screens, typing into a hand-me-down computer that barely held itself together. The world didn't know his name yet, but soon, everyone would. This is the story of the kid who hacked the Pentagon. It didn't begin with some grand mission, or even with malice. It began with curiosity. That restless, insatiable curiosity only a teenager can carry. Computers to him weren't machines, they were worlds. And in those worlds, boundaries weren't fences to be respected. They were puzzles to be solved. He discovered something that many kids his age never imagined, that the most powerful institutions in the world, the ones with trillion-dollar budgets, the ones entrusted with nuclear codes and classified intelligence, had cracks. Cracks you could slip through if you knew where to look.
And so he did. Night after night, his screen filled with lines of code and access points, he probed deeper, past firewalls, past passwords, past systems designed to be untouchable. Until one evening, his cursor blinked on a directory he wasn't supposed to see. Pentagon servers. Real ones. Behind them, sensitive military documents, reports, and classified simulations. Think about that for a moment. A child, not yet old enough to drive, stepping virtually into the beating heart of the American defense system. What he found there wasn't just data. It was proof that the most powerful fortress in the world could be breached, not by armies or missiles, but by a kid in his bedroom. The Pentagon didn't notice right away. The breach was subtle. He was careful, but in the cat-and-mouse world of cybersecurity, patience is always finite. Eventually, military cyber units spotted irregular patterns. Logs showed someone slipping in and out at odd hours, leaving behind faint digital fingerprints. The hunt began. But here's the thing. He wasn't hacking for money. He wasn't stealing secrets to sell. He wasn't working for a government or a gang. In interviews later, he said something chillingly simple. I just wanted to see if I could. It raises a haunting question. What's more dangerous, a malicious hacker trying to do harm, or a curious kid proving that the doors we thought were locked were never locked at all? Experts at the time were stunned. One Pentagon official compared it to leaving your front door wide open and realizing the neighbor's kid just wandered into your living room. But unlike a casual trespasser, this was national security. The implications were vast. If a teenager could break in, what about hostile governments? What about terrorists? The story spread like wildfire through news outlets. Teenager hacks the Pentagon. It had the perfect mix of fear and fascination. Parents saw it as a cautionary tale. Governments saw it as a wake-up call. And teenagers? Many of them saw him as a kind of legend, proof that the digital world was truly a frontier, wild, unclaimed, and vulnerable. But behind the headlines was a real human being, a boy who, by all accounts, was shy, often isolated, struggling to find his place in the real world, but thriving in the invisible one. Friends recalled how he rarely fit in at school, but online he was powerful. Online he mattered. And yet power always comes with a price. When authorities finally tracked him down, there was no dramatic raid in the middle of the night, no guns drawn, just agents at the door, a mother in shock, and a boy who realized the game was over. He was arrested, charged, and thrust into a legal battle he could barely comprehend. The trial was less about punishment and more about making a point. Governments wanted to show that hacking, no matter how innocent it appeared, had consequences. Prosecutors painted him as reckless, even dangerous. His lawyers argued he was just a kid exploring. Caught between curiosity and criminality, the world watched as his future hung in the balance. He avoided a long prison sentence, but not without scars. Restrictions were placed on his computer use. His name was etched forever into the history of hacking. He couldn't undo what he had done, and in many ways, he couldn't escape it. But perhaps the most haunting part of this story isn't what he did, it's what it revealed. That the digital world we rely on, for defense, for banking, for communication, is far more fragile than we care to admit. That in the late 1990s, before cybersecurity became a household word, a teenager's curiosity exposed vulnerabilities that billions of dollars of defense spending couldn't hide. Some called him a criminal, others a pioneer, a prodigy, even a hero of sorts, not because he attacked, but because he revealed. And isn't that the paradox of hacking? To break into a system is both an act of destruction and discovery. To expose weakness is to risk being punished, even as you've done the world a favor by proving it exists. Years later, cybersecurity experts still cite his story as a turning point. His case forced the US government to tighten defenses, to invest heavily in securing military networks. It inspired the creation of ethical hacking programs, where brilliant minds could test systems legally and get paid for it. In other words, his crime reshaped the very field of digital security. But what about him, the boy who once outsmarted the Pentagon? He faded from the headlines. For a time, he gave interviews, reflecting on what he had done. He spoke with a mix of pride and regret. Pride that he had pulled off something unthinkable. Regret that it had cost him so much. We don't often think of hackers as human beings. We think of shadows on a screen, anonymous avatars. But behind every keystroke is a person, driven by boredom, curiosity, greed, or desperation. And in this case, it was a lonely boy searching for meaning in a world that didn't seem to offer him much. The irony is he never considered himself dangerous. He never wanted to bring down governments or sell secrets. In his mind, he was just peeking behind the curtain. He didn't realize how fragile that curtain really was. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all. In an age where we entrust our lives to invisible systems, our money, our health, our identities, even our democracies, security isn't just about firewalls and passwords. It's about people. People like him, people who build systems, and people who break them. So when we tell the story of the kid who hacked the Pentagon, it's not just a story about hacking. It's a story about human curiosity, about vulnerability, about the thin line between brilliance and recklessness. Because in the end, what terrified the world wasn't that he got in. What terrified the world was that he could. And if he could, who else could too? That question still lingers. Every time a breach makes headlines, every time a new cyber attack disrupts lives, we remember him. The kid in his bedroom, glowing screen lighting his face, daring to test the limits of power. He was just one boy, but his actions still echo decades later, reminding us that the digital walls we build are never as strong as we think. And maybe, just maybe, it takes a curious kid to show us where they break.